Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is day 5 and the final day of the second leg of the inquiry into food systems in South Africa. Again, for introductions, I'm Commissioner Sandra Makwasha. To my left, I'm joined by Commissioner Pili Lintuli. To my right, I'm joined by Commissioner Nomahlube Kwinana. Ladies and gentlemen, we do apologize for the delay. It was just that we allow members of the public to join us, as this is a public hearing, and we note the importance of this inquiry. So we had to then ensure that members of the public are able to participate. Thank you for your patience for those who joined us virtually while we had to deal with these technical issues. In terms of today's program, we had the following stakeholders that needed to appear before the Commission. We had ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Spar, Woolworths, Massmart, Food Lovers Market, as well as the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. In terms of the Department of Corporate Governance and Traditional Affairs, due to the Minister's unavailability, which we were advised on Monday, he will not be appearing. In terms of the stakeholders, we only received written submissions from ShopRite as well as Massmart. However, during the course of the week, Massmart had advised that they request a postponement in order to liaison with Walmart, and that is where we find ourselves in. We have received a written submission from ShopRite. However, they have declined the invitation from the Commission to appear. Pick n Pay, Spar, Woolworths, we have not, and Food Lovers Market, we have not received any communication from them. In respect of Pick n Pay and Woolworths, as well as Food Lovers Market, they're advising that they will not be able to provide submissions. However, Spar has requested for a 3-month indulgence. It's important that those of us who live in South Africa and understand the importance of food security in a country such as South Africa note that food security is not the responsibility of government alone, civil society, and when the human rights institution calls upon such an important inquiry, that all stakeholders find it important to participate in this process. I will then allow the evidence leader to read into record the submissions from ShopRite checkers. We will then venture outside to receive a memorandum in respect of the retailers that were supposed to appear before the Commission, and after that, the panel members will then discuss and deliberate and advise on the way forward. Thank you so much. Professor?
Thank you very much, Chair. ShopRite made one submission to the Commission. It's a covering letter and a response to the 21 questions posed by the Commission to ShopRite. So the document itself is 30 pages long. The first 5 paragraphs are preliminary matters, and then the rest of the document answers 21 questions. I will read the submission in full into the record. This is a letter addressed 30 June 2026, addressed Dear Tami, T-H-A-M-I, and the heading is Invitation to make written and oral submissions to the National Inquiry into the Food Systems of South Africa. Paragraph 1, we act for ShopRite Checkers Proprietary Limited and refer to your letter dated 11 June 2026. Paragraph 2, please find below ShopRite's responses to the various questions set out in Annexure A to the letter. Paragraph 3, for convenience, we have repeated your questions in bold, italicized text with ShopRite's responses following thereafter. Paragraph 4, before addressing each question in turn, ShopRite wishes to record its support for the Commission's commitment to advancing the constitutional right to food as guaranteed under Section 27(1)(b) of the Constitution, and to confirm its willingness to engage constructively with the inquiry. ShopRite's submissions below are intended to demonstrate that the competitive dynamics within South Africa's food retail sector, including sustained investment by the ShopRite Group in price leadership, supply chain infrastructure, and inclusive procurement, are delivering measurable improvements in food affordability and security, and that these outcomes are best sustained through continued market-based competition rather than regulatory price intervention. Paragraph 5. The Shoprite Group reserves the right to supplement this written submission in future if required. That ends the cover letter. The submission then proceeds with the answers to the 21 questions from the Human Rights Commission. Paragraph 6. Concentration of power in the food value chain. Question 1. Please describe the company's position and role within the South African food value chain. 6.1. As South Africa's largest food retailer, the Shoprite Group occupies a systemically important position in the national food value chain and plays a central role in supporting food access, affordability, and economic stability. Its operations connect local food production to consumers at national scale, underpinning the constitutional right of access to sufficient food. 6.2. Upstream, the Shoprite Group provides market access to thousands of South African farmers and food manufacturers. Through its Fresh Mark division, approximately 95% of fresh produce sold is sourced locally, including from small and emerging farmers. This creates predictable demand, strengthens domestic agricultural capacity, and supports rural livelihoods. The Shoprite Group complements this with inclusive procurement and supplier development, spending 146.5 billion rand on BBBEE compliant suppliers in financial year 2025, thereby broadening participation in the formal food economy. Across the midstream of the value chain, the Shoprite Group operates one of the largest and most resilient food logistics networks in Africa. With 29 distribution centers and integrated transport and cold chain infrastructure, the Shoprite Group ensures reliable daily delivery of food across all provinces, including rural and low-income communities. This capability has proven resilient during periods such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2021 civil unrest, energy constraints, and broader supply shocks, and is critical to preventing shortages and maintaining food and, importantly, medicine availability at scale. 6.4. Downstream, the Shoprite Group's more than 3,600 stores, spanning all income segments, ensure that food is physically accessible to households nationwide. The Shoprite Group's scale enables sustained price leadership, allowing essential foods to be sold at the lowest possible prices through operational efficiency rather than regulatory intervention. This includes long-standing subsidized staple offerings such as 5 Rand bread, with approximately 1.8 million subsidized 5 Rand items sold every week. By December 2025, 14,400 products were cheaper year on year, and internal food inflation had fallen to a 7-year low, directly protecting household budgets during a period of significant economic pressure. 6.5. Through its Extra Savings Rewards program, the Shoprite Group has saved customers a cumulative 55 billion rand in cash since the program's inception in 2019, further demonstrating its sustained commitment to consumer affordability. 6.6. The impact of the Shoprite Group's sustained price discipline is corroborated by independent research. The South African Food Security Index 2025, an annual index produced by development economists from Stellenbosch University and commissioned by the Shoprite Group, rose from 44.9 in 2023 to 56.5 in 2024, the most significant year-on-year improvement in the index's history. The principal driver of this improvement was greater food price stability. This confirms that competitive market dynamics within the retail sector are delivering measurable food security improvements
Prof,
without the need for regulatory price intervention.
For interrupting. I do see that there are colleagues that are in the room that are still standing. Can I just ask that we sit and just respect the process? Thank you.
6.7. The Shoprite Group's role in the food system is closely linked to employment and the public interest. As South Africa's largest private sector employer, the Shoprite Group directly employs more than 170,000 people across its operations, of whom over 62% are women and 39.6% are under the age of 30, providing development and career prospects at scale. Between the 2021 and 2025 financial years, the group created 30,945 new direct jobs, including 8,723 in financial year 2025 alone, making it a major contributor to employment stability in a high unemployment economy. 6.8. The Shoprite Group's sustainability is further linked to the public interest through its ownership structure. Its largest shareholder is the Government Employees Pension Fund, South Africa's largest pension fund for public sector employees, which holds approximately 17.9% of issued share capital, valued at around 28.5 billion rand. The group's performance and dividend distributions therefore contribute directly to the retirement savings of millions of civil servants and pensioners. 6.9. Another significant public interest shareholder of the Shoprite Group is its employees through the Shoprite Employee Trust. Established in 2022, the SET is an evergreen, non-vesting BBBEE employee benefit trust that holds 40 million Shoprite shares, valued at approximately 8.9 billion rand at inception, for the benefit of eligible employees. Qualifying South African employees receive semi-annual distributions via units in the trust. The trust is funded primarily through notional vendor financing, which includes an initial 888 million rand capital contribution. Its establishment increased effective black ownership in Shoprite to approximately 19.2%. The Shoprite Employee Trust is governed by a board of trustees and subject to standard financial reporting and audit oversight. 6.10. At the same time, the Shoprite Group invests materially in hunger relief and food security, serving 222,349 meals per day in vulnerable communities and 1.9 million meals per annum in early childhood development centers. These interventions complement but do not substitute for the Shoprite Group's core role in maintaining a functioning, affordable and resilient food system. 6.11. The Shoprite Group operates under a formal human rights policy and supplier code of conduct aligned with South African law and international standards on labor rights, ethical sourcing and food safety, with oversight at board level. Through its scale, the Shoprite Group is able to reinforce compliance and raise standards across the food value chain. 6.12. In summary, the Shoprite Group submits that its sustainable business operations underpin food availability, affordability, employment, and systemic stability. There is then a figure which shows various numbers, such as number of staff, jobs created, number of stores, community food gardens. I will now move on to paragraph 7, which answers the question, what market share does the company hold within its primary product categories and geographic areas of operation? .1. In accordance with industry practice, Shoprite does not publish market share percentages, as the informal sector and significant parts of the formal sector's market shares and data are not readily available. The informal sector competes with corporate retail groups, as also reported in the final report of the Fresh Produce Market Inquiry, where the Competition Commission noted that, quote, the majority of South Africans fall within LSM levels 1 to 3, and their buying habits mirror their economic status. In this regard, consumers within this LSM will tend to purchase from street hawkers or retail brands such as Boxer and Shoprite Checkers, for example. 7.2. In the Competition Commission's final Fresh Produce Market Inquiry report, it found that, quote, in terms of a broader market delineation, Shoprite Checkers leads the competition with a market share of between 24 and 34%. In this broad market delineation, it is thus not outrightly dominant in terms of Section 7 of the Act, and evidence of market power will be required to prove if Shoprite Checkers is a dominant firm. 7.3. While the FPMI focused on fresh produce, independent research confirms the role of the informal sector in grocery retailing as a whole. In the South African Food Security Index 2025, the informal food economy contributes approximately 205 billion rand per year in turnover and accounts for an estimated 20% of retail food sales. This significant informal sector activity is largely unrecorded, rendering market share calculations assumption-based, unaudited, and unstable over time. 7.4. A recent report, 2025, by Trade Intelligence also emphasized the role of the informal sector. Quote, Despite rapid corporate expansion, the informal retail sector remains a significant player in South Africa's FMCG environment. Growth in the informal space was up 5.2% in 2024, with proximity and convenience continuing to drive shopper loyalty. Spaza shops and township outlets have retained relevance, particularly for small, frequent shopping missions and cash-based shoppers. 7.5. The Shoprite Group accordingly only publishes verifiable indicators of competitive performance, including formal market growth in rand terms and sustained trends consistent with industry practice. Paragraph 8 answers the question from the Human Rights Commission on anti-competitive practices. And the question is, the Competition Commission's Grocery Retail Market Inquiry Report of 2019 made adverse findings against supermarkets, and it recommended several remedial actions. For example, quote, national supermarket chains must with immediate effect cease from enforcing exclusivity provisions in their lease agreements against other grocery retailers, end quote. Please indicate the extent to which your organization has implemented or engaged with the remedial actions arising from the Competition Commission's Grocery Retail Market Inquiry. And this is Shoprite's response. 8.1. The Shoprite Group concluded a settlement agreement with the Competition Commission, which was confirmed by the Competition Tribunal on 9 October 2020, which addressed the principal remedial action applicable to it arising from the Grocery Retail Market Inquiry. 8.2. The Shoprite Group has provided the Competition Commission with ongoing monitoring and compliance updates and has demonstrated its ongoing adherence to the terms of the settlement agreement. Paragraph 9, Section 2, Price Formation and Food Affordability. And the question from the Commission is, how does your organization monitor the affordability of key staple foods for lower income consumers? How does this information influence pricing, promotions, and marketing strategies? And here is Shoprite's response. 9.1. The Shoprite Group remains committed to keeping prices as low as possible across all its supermarket brands. Despite challenging economic conditions, cost savings are passed on to customers wherever possible. 9.2. During financial year 2025, 13,300 items were in deflation for the full year. By December 2025, a record 14,400 products were cheaper than in December 2024, including double-digit price reductions across everyday staples. Internal food inflation also reached its lowest level in 7 years, as cost relief is passed on to the Shoprite Group's customers. See below graphic. 9.3. Notably, the Shoprite Group's internal selling price information has consistently been materially below the official food inflation rate. During the 2026 interim period, internal selling price inflation was just 0.7%, compared to Stats SA's official food inflation of 4.7%, the widest gap in 5 years. This confirms that the Shoprite Group is actively absorbing cost pressures rather than passing them on to consumers, behavior which is reflective of a very competitive grocery market in South Africa. There is then a graphic which is titled Consumers Win Amid Deflation Dilemma, and there are some graphs showing the gap between Shoprite prices and official food price inflation. A second figure follows. It's titled Building Long-Term Price Trust with Consumers, and it shows the amount of price reductions that Shoprite has compared to food inflation. 9.4. According to independent research published by Trade Intelligence, South Africa has one of the highest levels of promotional activity in the world, with a significant share of sales driven by specials and discounts. This confirms the highly competitive nature of the local food retail sector and the continued shift towards more value-conscious consumer behavior. 9.5. During the Shoprite Group's 2026 interim period, that's 26 weeks ended 28 December 2025, promotional participation exceeded 40% of sales, with promotional volumes increasing by 12.2%, indicating increased deal seeking across customer segments. For the 2025 financial year, 52 weeks ended 29 June 2025, Promotional sales contributed 36.4% of total sales. That's compared to 35.3% in financial year 2024, with promotional volumes increasing by 6.9%. 9.6. This environment places ongoing pressure on margins and requires continuous investment in price and promotions. It also highlights the extent to which consumers actively seek value and the role competition plays in supporting affordability. 9.7. Food pricing is, however, influenced by factors beyond the control of retailers. South Africa's status as a net agricultural exporter does not equate to self-sufficiency across all food categories. The country generates trade surpluses by exporting selected high-value products such as fruit and wines and maize, but remains reliant on global markets to meet shortfalls in other staples. As a result, South Africa is a net importer of several key commodities, including virtually all of its rice requirements and more than half of its annual wheat demand. 9.8. Prices for staple inputs such as maize and wheat are determined on the South African Futures Exchange, SAHRC, and are affected by global market conditions and exchange rate movements. In addition, critical inputs such as diesel, fertilizer, and agricultural equipment are priced in US dollars, exposing the supply chain to international cost pressures and social economic factors like the war in Ukraine and more recently Iran, which created a sudden global inflation shock with rapidly increasing oil prices. Retail food prices therefore reflect a combination of input, manufacturing, logistics, energy, labor, and currency dynamics. These are external cost factors which Shoprite has to deal with in order to provide affordable food to the most vulnerable customers. 9.9. Approximately 2,460 products' prices are independently surveyed on a weekly basis, and 109,945 are tracked in our competitor price repository across 14 competitors to monitor and maintain the Shoprite Group's competitive price positioning across its product range. 9.10. Within this context, the Shoprite Group continues to use its scale, efficiency, and operational capabilities to limit cost increases and ensure that affordable food remains accessible to millions of South Africans, a commitment that is central to its commercial strategy and its role in the food system. 9.11. As an example, since 2016, Shoprite has kept the price of its 600-gram in-house brown bread at just R5. This R5 offering also includes subsidized daily meals, such as a protein-rich ox liver burger or a hard-boiled egg, as well as essential hygiene products like locally manufactured sanitary pads to help keep girls in school, a 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner and body wash. These products are available daily across more than 710 Shoprite supermarkets nationwide, with approximately 1.8 million R5 items subsidized each week to help protect household budgets and support food security in South Africa. There follows a graph which is titled, "What Can You Buy for R5?" and subtitled, "Shoprite sells nearly 600,000 loaves of bread a week for R5 each." And the graph shows Shoprite's price fixed at R5, while other prices such as petrol and average bread prices across the sector rising across that period from 2016. There are then two photographs showing food counters in Shoprite stores. There is then a box which is titled "Widest Gap versus Official Food Inflation in 5 Years." And now I'll read the contents of the box. Stats SA official food inflation measures, Stats SA official food inflation measures a basket weighted on 2023 reality, e.g. load shedding essentials, which misses current reality. Internal selling price inflation reflects lived consumer inflation experience. 1, it tracks over 56,000 products every day. 2, basket is weighted based on current period. 3, it reflects real price paid by customers, including all promotions. And 4, it captures real purchasing shifts, switching between products, pack sizes, and categories based on substitutability and better value. We move to paragraph 10. which addresses question 5 on pricing. The question from the Commission is, quote, what margins does your organization earn on staple food items? How severely would waiving 10 to 20% of profit margin on these items to make them more affordable affect your overall profitability? Why are your organization's prices for fresh produce much higher, often double or more, than fresh produce markets or street traders? And this is ShopRite's response. 10.1, for the financial year, its reported trading profit margin was 5.7%, which is considered world-class in terms of operational effectiveness. 10.2, requiring retailers to waive profit margins on staple food items by 10 to 20% is equivalent to imposing a price ceiling to below cost-reflective levels. ShopRite will not be able to trade at a price which is below the cost of procuring goods. 10.3, this is because margin reductions of this magnitude would require a series of unintended consequences. I'll read that sentence again. This is because margin reductions of this magnitude would risk a series of unintended consequences across the food value chain. When prices fall below cost-reflective levels, the incentive structure for both suppliers and retailers are impacted. On the supply side, farmers will face reduced demand signals. Smaller producers who operate on the thinnest margins will be the first to exit, and investment in logistics and cold chain infrastructure will decline. On the retail side, the ShopRite Group has fixed costs such as leases, energy costs, labor costs, etc., and reductions in prices and margins will cause a restructuring of the entire business and the closure of unprofitable stores. The consequent reduction in supply will be felt most acutely in rural and low-income areas, where the ShopRite Group is often an important formal food retailer and where consumers have the fewest alternative sources of supply. 10.4, international experience confirms that sustained below-cost pricing interventions do not improve food security outcomes. Rather, they shift pressure from price to availability, with the result that reduced formal supply may be partially displaced into informal and illicit channels, often at higher prices, lower in quality, and possibly unsafe in terms of health and safety standards. 10.5, the ShopRite Group respectfully submits that interventions which suppress prices below cost-reflective levels risk unintended consequences for food availability. International experience and basic economic principles suggest that sustained margin compression may reduce supply incentives, ultimately harming the very consumers that such measures are intended to protect. 10.6, the ShopRite Group takes any suggestion that its pricing is materially above market levels seriously. However, the assertion that the ShopRite Group's fresh produce prices are, quote, often double the price of street traders, end quote, is not consistent with the ShopRite Group's own pricing data and its understanding of the market. In order to provide a comprehensive and evidence-based response, the ShopRite Group respectfully requests that the data underlying this assertion be shared with it, including the products, locations, dates, and methodology of the comparison. 10.7. We would also like to draw the attention of the Human Rights Commission to the fact that ShopRite has provided detailed data on fresh produce prices to the Competition Commission's Fresh Produce Market Inquiry. The non-confidential final report, January 2025, is available, and no finding has been made that would confirm the claim that fresh produce prices are double that of street traders. In fact, the FPMI confirmed that fresh produce markets play an important role as they are used as a benchmark for the determination of fresh produce prices. 10.8. In its submissions to the FPMI, ShopRite also noted that price comparisons in fresh produce are inherently complex and must take into account material differences in product and operating conditions, including 10.8.1, product variation, grade, and quality standards, 10.8.2, seasonality and availability, 10.8.3, cold chain integrity and cold storage infrastructure, which extends shelf life and reduce spoilage, 10.8.4, remaining shelf life at point of sale, e.g. same-day expiry versus multiple days remaining, 10.8.5, compliance with income tax and VAT obligations, 10.8.6, adherence to occupational health, food safety, and labor regulations, full stop. 10.9, these factors materially influence cost structures and pricing outcomes for both informal traders and formal retailers, and should be considered before drawing comparative conclusions on pricing levels. Question 11, section 11, food system. Question from the Human Rights Commission. Quote, what role does your organization play in ensuring that South Africa's food system delivers affordable, nutritious food for all, but especially to low-income consumers? ShopRite's response to this question is, quote, please refer to the responses provided in paragraph 9 above. Paragraph 12. Question 7 from the Commission on malnutrition. Quote, South Africa faces undernutrition as well as rising rates of obesity and diet-related diseases. How does your organization consider these dual challenges when designing product ranges, sourcing decisions, brackets who to buy from, or pricing strategies? ShopRite's response, 12.1. Nutritious food remains central to the ShopRite Group's focus on affordability. This is demonstrated through initiatives such as ShopRite's 5 Rand daily meals, which include an ox liver burger, a product rich in protein, iron, and fats. In addition, the ShopRite Group regularly evaluates what a 370 Rand social relief of distress grant recipient could purchase in its supermarkets to maximize their food budget. This prompted the group to make a conscious decision to invest in the price of cabbage, one of the country's most widely consumed, nutritious, and versatile staples. During the 2025 financial year, 24 million Rand was invested to cap the price of cabbage at 12.99 Rand in USave supermarkets and 14.99 Rand in ShopRite supermarkets, despite rising input costs and market prices. 12.2. For approximately 45 Rand, a SRD customer, that's Social Relief of Distress Grant, customer can buy the following items at any ShopRite supermarket. 12.2.1, a packet of chicken necks for 20 Rand from the butchery. 12.2.2, a 50-gram packet of Right brand soup for 5 Rand. 12.2.3, a 600-gram loaf of 5 Rand bread. And 12.2.4, a whole cabbage for 14 Rand 99. There then follows a graph called Cutting the Cost of Cabbage, and the subheading is ShopRite has invested 24 million Rand to keep cabbage at 14 Rand 99 in ShopRite stores and 12 Rand 99 in USave stores, although it's often sold for less. And the graph shows the price of ShopRite cabbages versus the average price of cabbage, which rose from 18 Rand 79 in 2023 to 23 Rand 93 by June 2025. 12.3. Furthermore, ShopRite's new Right brand private label range contains call-outs on the front of pack, assisting with providing educational information about nutritious food products, for example, baked beans, a source of fiber, pilchards, high in omega-3 fatty acids, oats and peanut butter, both high in fiber, high in energy, etc. 12.4. The ShopRite Group is also a partner in the Kulisa Care initiative, launched in August 2025 in collaboration with the Western Cape Government, the DG Murray Trust, and the Grow Great campaign. This whole-of-society program targets underweight pregnant women and mothers at risk of delivering low birth weight babies, providing monthly food vouchers redeemable at ShopRite stores for a basket of 10 protein-rich foods aligned with World Health Organization guidelines. The initiative combines nutritional support with comprehensive primary health care, including growth monitoring, breastfeeding counseling, and immunization support. It exemplifies the type of targeted multi-stakeholder collaboration that the ShopRite Group believes is most effective in addressing food insecurity. 12.5. According to the Bureau for Food and Agriculture Policy's 2025 baseline, the cost of a basic, quote, thrifty, healthy food basket, end quote, is projected to increase by only 2.9% in 2025, below the projected overall food inflation rate of 4.5%. This suggests that interventions targeted at keeping staple and nutritious food affordable, of the type the ShopRite Group undertakes, are moderating the cost burden for vulnerable households. Paragraph 13 addresses question 8 from the Human Rights Commission, and it's about healthy diets. Quote, what steps is your organization taking to help consumers identify and switch to healthier food options, particularly for those who have limited resources or access to nutrition information? ShopRite's response: please refer to the responses set out in paragraph 12 above. Paragraph 14. This paragraph addresses question 9 from the Human Rights Commission on the Health Promotion Levy, or HPL. Question: the HPL reduced sugar consumption through beverages by 33% in 2 years, with no evidence of job losses. What was your organization's position with respect to the HPL? What is your organization's current position regarding the health promotion levy and possible extension thereof to 100% of fruit juices, sweetened dairy drinks, and other high sugar products? ShopRite responds as follows. 14.1. The Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, of which the ShopRite Group is a member, is a signatory of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition's South African Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan to 2030, dated 10 April 2026. 14.2. The master plan positions the sugarcane sector as a critical contributor to rural livelihoods and economic stability. The sector is estimated to support approximately 1 million direct and indirect livelihoods, spanning agricultural production, milling, refining, and downstream activities. 14.3. In this context, Phase 2 of the master plan places job retention and mitigation at the center of its policy framework. The stated intention is not primarily to expand employment numbers materially in the short term, but rather to prevent further job losses and stabilize existing employment across the value chain, particularly in vulnerable rural regions. The master plan is explicitly framed as a response to prior sectoral distress and aims to protect jobs and sustain livelihoods through coordinated intervention by government, industry, and labor. 14.4. Regarding the health promotion levy on sugary beverages, the master plan reflects a cautious stance from an economic and employment perspective. The plan incorporates the HPL as a key pillar requiring alignment with industrial and employment objectives. 14.5. Industry stakeholders within the framework of Phase 2 emphasize that the HPL has had a negative impact on domestic sugar demand, contributing to financial strain within the sector and associated employment risks. Consequently, the prevailing position reflected in Phase 2 deliberations is that policy stability is required, with particular support for the maintenance of a moratorium on increases to the HPL, as this is considered critical to enabling sector recovery and safeguarding jobs. Paragraph 10 addresses paragraph 15 addresses question 10 from the SA Human Rights Commission, and it's about marketing. Quote, research has shown that voluntary self-regulation against marketing unhealthy food to children has had, quote, no noticeable impact, end quote. Given this fact, does your organization support the introduction of mandatory legally binding restrictions, such as draft regulation R3337, on the marketing of foods high in sugar, salt, and saturated fat to children? If not, why not? ShopRite's response. 15.1. Membership to the ShopRite Group's Extra Savings Rewards Program is restricted to persons aged 18 years and older and requires a valid South African ID or passport at registration. 15.2. Persons under the age of 18 are excluded from the program and do not receive marketing materials. 15.3. Direct marketing communications to members, including SMS, email, and app notifications, are opt-in only and require explicit consent, which may be withdrawn at any time. Opting out does not affect membership or access to instant in-store savings. These measures align with the Protection of Personal Information Act, POPIA, by preventing routine processing of children's personal information and ensuring consent-based, transparent marketing practices. 15.4. Furthermore, the group adheres to the Code of Advertising Practice administered by the Advertising Regulatory Board. 15.5. As regards the introduction of mandatory legally binding restrictions on the marketing of unhealthy food to children, the ShopRite Group is supportive in principle of evidence-based regulatory measures that protect children's health, provided that such measures are proportionate, clearly defined, and implemented in consultation with industry stakeholders to ensure practical enforceability. Paragraph 16 addresses question 11 from the Commission. Quote, would you support price caps or zero margin policies on basic food baskets? ShopRite response. 16.1. The ShopRite Group does not support price caps on food. 16.2. As set out in detail in paragraph 10 above, any intervention that suppresses prices below sustainable market levels risks reducing supply and ultimately harming the consumers such measures are intended to protect. 16.3. Any intervention that suppresses prices below sustainable market levels will reduce supply and lead to food shortages. In competitive food markets, such interventions do not eliminate pressure. They shift it from price to availability and ultimately higher prices in illicit trade in countries where law enforcement is a challenge, which also increases the risk of unsafe food being sold in the trade. 16.4. While the comparison is imperfect, South Africa's experience with heavily regulated excisable products illustrates the broader risk of supply displacement when formal market channels are weakened. For example, illicit trade is estimated to account for a substantial share of the cigarette market, with some estimates placing it as high as 75%, while illicit alcohol trade is also significant, approximately 25%, and reportedly growing. Where formal market channels are weakened and enforcement is constrained, supply and demand can shift rapidly into illicit trade. 16.5. The ShopRite Group supports efforts to improve affordability for vulnerable households. It is a priority that sits at the core of its business. This objective, however, must be pursued without disrupting the market dynamics that sustain food production and supply. Food 16.6. Food supply is a fully integrated value chain, including agriculture, manufacturing, processing, logistics, and retail. Each participant must remain economically viable. If viability is weakened at any point, the consequent effect is transmitted across the system as reduced supply. 16.7. In South Africa, this constraint is more acute due to import dependence and global input pricing. Retail level intervention cannot offset these underlying cost drivers. 16.8. In competitive markets such as food retail, prices are predominantly a function of supply, demand, and input costs. The ShopRite Group acknowledges that targeted regulatory intervention may be appropriate in defined circumstances, but submits that the food retail sector, characterized by intense competition and thin margins, does not exhibit the market conditions that would warrant direct price regulation. Paragraph 17, addressing question 12 of 21 questions from the Commission. Quote, please explain the factors that contribute to the pricing of food products sold by the company. What proportion, using any metric suitable to you, of retail food prices is attributable to raw materials, processing and manufacturing, packaging, logistics and transportation, energy costs, labor costs, and retail margins? ShopRite's response, paragraph 17.1. The Competition Commission publishes regular food price monitoring reports. It noted as early as in its 2022 report that South African imports of oilseed accounted for 37% of domestic consumption in 2020-21, and that as a result, the price of cooking oil in South Africa is significantly exposed to global price changes. In turn, the Competition Commission indicated that supply shortages and strong demand globally have caused price increases, which then flowed into domestic markets as a large part of South Africa's oilseeds are important. End quote. 17.2. More recently, during a March 2026 MoneyWeb podcast interview, investment manager Keith McLaughlin noted that around 15 to 20% of the cost of producing food is directly attributable to fuel, brackets diesel or petrol, and if one factors in transport and distribution, the total contribution of diesel-related costs can reach roughly 40 to 50% of the overall cost of food. 17.3. The above data point suggests that improving South Africa's transport network, particularly rail freight, will moderate food prices by lowering structural logistics costs in the food value chain. As much of 80% of staple grains are transported by road, making food prices highly sensitive to diesel costs and road inefficiency, while rail offers a lower cost per ton kilometre and greater fuel efficiency for bulk commodities. Shifting freight to rail will reduce input and distribution costs, which may not immediately cut shelf prices but will materially slow food price inflation by limiting cost pass-through to consumers. 17.4. Below is a table reflecting trading profit margins as published by multiple retailers. There follows a table which shows trading profit margins for Pick n Pay, Boxer, Spar, and Woolworths. 17.5. This data reflects that profit margins earned by retailers in South Africa are small without room for reduction. We now come to paragraph 18, and I would just pause here and note that we are on page 21 out of 29, so we have about 8 pages to go. We are more than 2/3 through. Paragraph 18 addresses barriers to participation in the food system, and the question from the Human Rights Commission: what percentage of your suppliers are 1, small-scale producers, 2, black-owned enterprises, 3, local versus imported? Shoprite Group's response: 18.1, the Shoprite Group supports small local suppliers to join the retail sector. In financial year 2025, the Shoprite Group 1 spent 146.5 billion rand on BBBE compliant businesses. 2, procured 1.4 billion of rand of fresh produce from South African SMMEs. 3, spent 18.9 billion on more than 30% black women-owned suppliers. 4, directed 11.9% of supplier spend to black-owned businesses and 8.8% to black women-owned businesses. 5, spent 28.8 billion rand on more than 51% black-owned suppliers. 6, sourced 98.2% of procurement locally to contribute to local economic development, with the Shoprite Group's policy being to import only items where inadequate volumes are available locally to sustain demand. And 7, sourced 90.9% of private label products locally. Paragraph 19 addresses question 14 from the Commission, quote, what barriers do small-scale farmers, emerging enterprises, women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, and informal food traders face in accessing the company's supply chains? Shoprite's response: 19.1, kindly refer to Shoprite's State of the SMME in South Africa report as published in 2025. 19.2, small-scale farmers, emerging enterprises, women and youth-owned businesses, and informal traders face barriers to accessing formal retail supply chains in South Africa, with constraints across gender, geography, age, and education. 19.3, these barriers include relatively high real interest rates, inefficient rail and port infrastructure, high logistics costs, and geographic concentration of economic activity, with 65.9% of SMMEs located in Gauteng and the Western Cape, and provinces such as the Northern Cape accounting for only less than 1%. 19.4. High costs of doing business, brackets, electricity instability and water scarcity, end brackets, further constrain smaller suppliers. Regulatory requirements, brackets, food safety, traceability, packaging, and labeling, end brackets, create significant compliance burdens and adds to the cost of doing business, while capability gaps limit the ability of many entrepreneurs to operate formal, compliant businesses. 19.5. The report further highlights structural inequality, including that 51.2% of SMMEs are male-owned, while women are concentrated in smaller enterprises and face greater barriers to scaling, including limited access to funding and networks. Younger entrepreneurs demonstrate innovation, but face barriers to entry, resources, and market access. Informal traders are additionally constrained by limited access to finance, logistics, and formal procurement systems. 19.6. The ShopRite Group recognizes that access to markets is itself a key barrier and has made a measurable impact through targeted supplier support, including 1. More than 350 million rand committed to SMME and supplier development programs over 5 years. 2. 220 million rand invested in developing independent retailers, spaza shops, and micro caterers. 3. 359 million rand invested in SMME suppliers and 327 million rand in micro farmers, including access to distribution centers, compliance support, and technical assistance. And 4. Plus or minus 895 million rand in working capital support provided through 7-day payment terms. 19.7. These interventions demonstrate a meaningful contribution to improving market access, liquidity, and capability for emerging suppliers. Notwithstanding this impact, broader structural constraints across infrastructure, cost pressures, regulatory complexity, and capability gaps continue to limit inclusive participation in formal retail supply chains in South Africa. 19.8. Please refer to the ShopRite Group's website for evidence of SMMEs enabled and supported by the ShopRite Group. Paragraph 20 addresses question 15 from the Commission. Quote, what recommendations would the company make to government and other stakeholders to create a more inclusive food system? End quote. Paragraph 21. The ShopRite Group recommends the following measures to create a more inclusive and effective food system. 21.1. Prioritize the rehabilitation of South Africa's rail freight infrastructure, particularly for bulk grain commodities. As noted in paragraph 15.3 above, approximately 80% of staple grains are currently transported by road, making food prices highly sensitive to diesel costs. A shift to reliable rail would materially reduce structural logistics costs in the food value chain. 21.2. Streamline regulatory requirements for small and emerging food suppliers, including simplified food safety certification pathways and reduced administrative burdens to lower barriers to entry into formal retail supply chains. 21.3. Strengthen enforcement against illicit and counterfeit goods, which undermine the viability of compliant producers and retailers and pose public health risks. 21.4. Explore nutrition-sensitive social protection instruments, such as food voucher schemes targeted at vulnerable groups during critical life phases, including pregnancy and early childhood, building on initiatives such as the Kalusa Care pilot in the Western Cape. 21.5. Invest in monitoring and data systems for food security and dietary diversity. South Africa currently lacks robust national dietary measurement systems, which hampers the design and targeting of effective interventions. We come to section 6 of the Human Rights Commission's letter to ShopRite, and it addresses the right to food and corporate responsibility. And it starts with question 16. This is question 16 out of 21 questions on the right to food. Quote, would you agree that your organization has a responsibility to support the constitutional right of all people in South Africa to have access to sufficient food? If yes, how is this responsibility reflected in your policies and operational practices? ShopRite's response. 22.1. The group notes that the right of access to sufficient food under Section 27.1b of the Constitution is qualified by Section 27.2, which provides that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of this right. The Constitutional Court's decision in Government of the Republic of South Africa versus Grootboom, 2001, SA 46 CC, confirmed that, quote, other measures, end quote, may include contributions by the private sector to the realization of socio-economic rights. The ShopRite Group submits that its sustained investment in food affordability, distribution infrastructure, employment, and community-based food security programs constitutes a material contribution to the progressive realization of this right, one that complements but does not substitute for the state's primary obligations. 22.2. The ShopRite Group considers that its purpose is to uplift lives every day by pioneering access to the most affordable goods and services, creating economic opportunity, and protecting the planet. In other words, the ShopRite Group takes its responsibility to help ensure that people in South Africa have access to affordable and efficient food very seriously. 22.3. This is reflected in both its strategy and day-to-day operations, including 1. Affordability. A sustained commitment to minimizing consumer prices through scale, efficiency, and supply chain optimization, ensuring that basic food items remain accessible to low-income households. 2. Availability and access. A nationwide store footprint that extends into underserved and rural communities, supported by a distribution network designed to ensure consistent supply of essential goods. 3. Food security initiatives. Ongoing investment in community programs such as mobile soup kitchens, surplus food donations, and support for community food gardens, which collectively address both immediate hunger and longer-term resilience. 4. Responsible sourcing and supplier development. Strong local procurement and supplier support initiatives that contribute to economic inclusion. 22.4. These operational practices are underpinned by the group's broader environmental, social, and governance framework, which embeds responsible, ethical, and sustainable business conduct across all operations. 22.5. Further detail on the ShopRite Group's policies and governance structures is available on the ShopRite Group's corporate website. Paragraph 23 addresses question 17 from the Commission. Quote, what mechanisms exist for communities, consumers, and suppliers to raise concerns relating to food access, affordability, or business practices? ShopRite's response. 23.1. The ShopRite Group maintains formal, accessible mechanisms through which communities, consumers, and suppliers may raise concerns relating to food access, affordability, and business practices. Fair treatment is practiced as a matter of principle, not merely compliance, and stakeholder feedback is actively encouraged. 23.2. The ShopRite Group supports the United Nations International Guidelines for Consumer Protection, adheres to the Consumer Goods and Services Industry Code, and participates in the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud scheme. The group was a founding participant in the CGSO and remains a subscribing member. These instruments are applied as minimum standards within internal policies and procedures. 23.3. Consumers and community members may lodge concerns through multiple channels, including a centralized customer contact center, which when originally launched was understood to be South Africa's first toll-free retail customer service number, as well as via social media platforms, web chat, email, digital feedback tools, and in-store engagement with store management. 23.4. Suppliers may raise concerns through established supplier engagement processes, including escalation via designated commercial and compliance channels, as well as a toll-free whistleblower hotline. 23.5. All customer and stakeholder engagements are subject to executive and board committee oversight with defined reporting structures and escalation protocols in place. Material, systemic, or sensitive matters are escalated to senior management and, where appropriate, to board-level governance structures to ensure accountability, remedial action, and regulatory compliance. Paragraph 24 moves on to Section 5, Programs to Advance Access to Food. Question 18 from the Commission, quote, please provide details of all programs, initiatives, and partnerships implemented by the company to advance food security and access to food, including 1. Food donation programs, 2. School nutrition support, 3. Community feeding initiatives, 4. Agricultural development programs, 5. Supplier development initiatives, 6. Support to smallholder farmers, 7. Food loss and waste, and this is qualified. What systems or protocols are in place within your organization to minimize food loss and waste throughout food value chains and to redistribute edible surplus food to communities or organizations addressing food insecurity? 8. Other social investment initiatives related to food security. 9. Corporate social responsibility, and this is qualified. What corporate social responsibility initiatives around food does your organization implement? Do you have evidence that these CSI initiatives result in meaningful reductions in hunger and food insecurity among lower income consumers? ShopRite's response, 24.1. Further to what has already been disclosed above, during financial year 2025, the ShopRite Group invested 469.7 million rand in socio-economic development programs in the communities where it operates. This support 349 meals reaching vulnerable communities daily through its hunger relief program. 2. More than 8.9 million meals served through a fleet of 33 mobile soup kitchens across 5 African countries. 3. Support for 138 early childhood development centers, improving nutrition for 9,349 children and providing skills training to 93 ECD practitioners. 4. Support, which includes permaculture training, and 5. Food gardens produced a harvest of an estimated 106,595 kilograms, and indirectly, I'll read that again. Food gardens produced a harvest of an estimated 106,595 kilograms, and indirectly 24.2. ShopRite Next Capital, established in June 2022, is a business division dedicated to grow commercially viable SMMEs to further the group's continued efforts to give small suppliers access to its consumer market. It operates as a one-stop shop for SMME partners by providing working capital assistance, packaging and labeling support, product and geographic expansion, possible private label partnerships, and more. Safety and working with vetted partners. 24.6. In the 2025 financial year, the ShopRite Group donated